All right, it's time to do the EMEA tier list based off the performances at Lock in Brazil and my thoughts on each team and how I think their 2023 season is going to go. So let's go ahead and hop in with Giants Gaming, who I think maybe surprised some people. I thought that their showing was certainly respectable and probably a bit better than most people thought they would do. Ultimately, they went out to NRG, who I think is one of the strongest teams in the tournament. So, no shame in that. They obviously have a lot of talent, between Cloud and Nookie and Fatinho. I thought they looked quite good, and I think that they could probably get better. I'm a little bit worried about, potential roster issues at some point, just because every team that Nookie's been on, there's been some problems throughout the year if things are not going well. But I do think that they showed a lot of potential to go in the opposite direction as well and sort of like reach for a new high. So I could see them, maybe ending up in the A tier by the end of the year. But I think for me, they are probably at the top of B or the bottom of A right now. Probably at the top of B right now. I do think that this very easily could be an A tier team. And I may actually need to move them as I go through this list, because I think there's going to be maybe too many teams in B. So moving on to the next team, which is BBL. I think this is also a team that potentially could end up in B at some point this year. I think for me right now, they're a C tier team, but it's really close. I thought that they looked, reasonably good. I think that the Turkish teams in general, both BBL and FUT, are sort of like wild cards to some extent, where one day they can just show up and look incredible and they could beat, maybe almost any team in this league. But the consistency has always been an issue for, I feel, the Turkish teams. And so for me, BBL, they have the potential to be really good, but they're just not consistent enough to rank all that highly for me. So they're in C tier. Moving on to Koi, I think that Koi is also a solid team that could, reach the upper echelons of the league. I think they've got really solid talent. They've got potential to grow. The problem for them that I saw was that Wolfen, their jet player, took almost half the first duels across their two maps that they played and won less than half of them. So it's kind of hard to win rounds when you're always down a player. And, even with the likes of the rock steady Shados, the very flexible Stark, so it can be hard to kind of make up for that. And so Wolfen certainly has the talent to be a good player, but right now seems to be kind of raw in terms of his potential. So I think I would probably put Koi sort of like towards the middle to bottom of B, but I definitely could see them being a team that could reach the A tier by the end of the year. Moving on to Heretics. I think Heretics were one of the more disappointing teams. We've got Mixwell, we've got Kellox, we've got Zeke. Honestly, this team just looked so inconsistent and chaotic, and I think that they have some potential role issues. I've never really been super clear on like what Mixwell's idea is for where he's supposed to play in the game. We've seen him go between the jet and be the kind of fragger role all the way down to playing super supportive. In my opinion, he's best in sort of like the lurk passive role, the Vipers, the Sentinel type of stuff, but he's kind of playing the initiators here, and I don't know. It's very hard to get a read on this team. There's obviously talent there. Kellox looked like he was going to single-handedly win a map, but then all of a sudden disappeared, and it's so feast or famine. Honestly, for me, I think Heretics is probably at the bottom of the entire league. I think that they looked like the worst team at lock-in, and I think that well, I don't know. Maybe Liquid was the worst team at lock-in, but we'll get to Liquid in just a second. I just don't really see a whole lot of real growth opportunity for Heretics. I think that they kind of have the same core that's had issues ever since G2 with the Mixwell and Kellox, and the player quality just doesn't really have what it takes to compete against the likes of Fnatic and some of the other teams. So moving on, Carmencore. Carmencore is a very hard one for me to rate because they just kind of seem like they're playing a different game than everybody. Scream was constantly talking about how much he like hates duelists now. He doesn't think that the duelist agents are good. And yet he's like one of the best duelist players in the game. It's very hard for me to get a read on this team. Their comps were kind of weird. The way they were playing the game was different than everybody. Maybe it could be good. It just didn't seem like the most structured. I feel like there's definitely some fall off in terms of the skill of the players on this team as well. Navera and Scream are obviously, world class talent. I think that, Shin and Newzera had good moments, but there were also some bad moments. So for me, I think Carmencore is like bottom of B, maybe C tier, maybe top of C. They're probably a C tier team for me, honestly. And it's hard to see them getting that much better just because right now, if you want to play on Carmencore, you basically have to be a French speaking player, and the pool of French speaking players doesn't seem that large right now. So I don't know really who else they can get. And I just don't think that with their current roster, they have what it takes to be at the top of the league. So speaking of the team who did assemble a team that has the potential to be at the top of the league, Fnatic, clearly S tier. Obviously, they won lock-in. And quite frankly, they just have 4 players who, on any given game, could be the best player in the server against any team in the entire world. Their team is so stacked, and they have been sort of meta trendsetters for a while. And I think they finally have like the talent of players and the flexibility of players to be able to basically do whatever they want. And that's very scary. Because as more agents continue to be introduced to the game, the meta is going to be even more sort of malleable to whatever you want to do. Even though they might not have had like the best read on the meta at this current tournament, with not having really the Harbor Viper stuff, which seemed to be very powerful, they still looked incredible. I think they have the best duelist in the world in Dirka. Chronicle could be the best player in the world. Potentially played 5 agents in the finals. Insane. They're just so good. There isn't a whole lot else we have to say about Fnatic. Liquid. Now, this was supposed to be the team to challenge Fnatic and Na'Vi for the title this year, but what we saw at lock-in was atrocious. They just did not look like they were playing Valorant. It's kind of one of those situations where they're like, everybody was just kind of like playing solo queue in the server almost to some extent. And it was just bad. So it's hard for me to put them too high, but it's also hard for me to put them too low because of the quality of players in their team. And I guess mostly I'm thinking about like Nats and Redgar in that sense, and Safe probably. I think that they assembled a very talented team, but I do think that they're going to have consistent issues this year. And the reason for that is that their roles have some problems. They picked up Safe, who was one of the most impressive Oppers and Jet players and Chamber players last year, but then he's playing Sentinel for them. And Yappy's playing the Jet. And Yappy's a good Jet, but he's also known for sort of being somewhat inconsistent. He has the potential to win games for his team, also has potential to lose games for his team. I feel like Safe is a very rock solid, very consistent, good performer. In my opinion, he should be playing the Jet role, but then where does that put Yampy? And you've got Nats, who's like the Master Sentinel player, but obviously he has to play Viper on certain maps. You've got Redgar, who's just trying to fill whatever hole they need. You've got Soulcast, who's definitely a flexible player, but in my opinion, was one of the weaker players on Liquid last year, and they kept him on the roster. I don't really know what's going to happen with this team. I have a hard time putting them anywhere, to be honest. For me, I'm going to put them in the B tier because I think their player quality is so good, potentially, but also I think that there's going to be some issues. So maybe, man, yeah, I don't know. I'm putting them in B tier, and I'm just going to move on. Vitality for me belongs in the A tier. And, maybe Giants should be up there now. I think the Vitality and Giants are fairly close. I really did like how Vitality looked. I thought that they showed, some nerves on stage. Maybe they showed a little bit of maybe not having like the deepest map pool, but I thought that they looked like one of those teams that you could see growing throughout the year and becoming a real scary force in the league. So I'm going to put them solidly in A tier. I think that, I've always liked Bone Cold. I've always liked, the many of the players on their team. Um, yeah, I think I'm pretty happy with them in A tier. All right, I'm just gonna move on to Navi. I feel like some of these teams, it's like EMEA for me is probably the hardest one to rank, just because it's really hard to tell what we got from a lot of these teams at lock-in. So moving on to Navi, they're the other S tier team here. They looked great. They, maybe have a small fall off from Artist CNED, depending on what agents are being played. I think in some cases CNED can be better than Artist. In some cases, Artist can be better than CNED. It's very hard to tell who is actually the better player. Their core is incredible. Their map pool is incredible. Their flexibility is incredible. I think on any given day, Fnatic and Navi would be, one of those like 50-50 matchups. I'm really excited to see them continue to get better throughout the year, because I think that they will. I think they're going to be hungry to, show that they are the team to beat, and Fnatic is going to be right there butting heads with them the entire year. FUT is another interesting one, and I think FUT for me was the better of the Turkish teams, and I think they're somewhere between top of B and A tier. I think, honestly, I'm going to move this around a little bit. I'm going to put FUT. I think I'm going to put Giants, FUT, and Vitality all in A, actually, and leave Koi and Liquid in B, Carmen and BBL in C, and Heretics in D. I think this makes the most sense to me. As far as if we're thinking about who's going to qualify, there's 4 slots to qualify for Masters Tokyo. Fnatic, Navi are making it 100%. And then I feel like probably any of these 5, maybe even Karmine Corp. It's really hard to tell with these EMEA teams. But for me, FUT looked like the better Turkish team. I feel like they had a lot of, upset potential in the tournament. I think that some of their ideas were really good. Their firepower can be very good. And, they gave some of the top teams a run for their money throughout the bracket before going up, relatively early. That being said, the tier gap, there should almost be a tier gap between these top 2 teams and the rest of EMEA. It's almost like this is what we should do, to be honest, just because I don't think anyone came even close to Fnatic and Navi from the rest of these teams. But, for the sake of having a more organized tier list, I think this is what I'm going to go with. So yeah, let me know what you think in the comments below, and we'll see you in the next one.